Living alone always seemed like a great idea to me. After years of noise and hustle in the big city, I finally managed to rent a small apartment on the top floor of an old building. It was cozy, with a view of neighboring rooftops and a park. I felt safe in this quiet neighborhood, but one night, that illusion of safety was shattered. I woke up to a strange sound. It was quiet but insistent, like something was scratching at the window. The first thing that came to my mind was the wind. The night winds often wandered through the streets, rustling the curtains. However, the sound didn't stop. It grew louder, and that made me get out of bed. I walked over to the window, carefully drew back the curtain, and looked outside. My heart skipped a beat. There was a person standing on the narrow ledge. He wasn't moving, just standing there, facing me. His face was indistinguishable in the dark, but I could feel his gaze. A chill ran down my spine. "Who's there?" I said, but my voice barely made a sound. There was no answer. The stranger continued to stare at me. I couldn't move, as if I was pinned to the floor. Suddenly, he took a step forward. The stranger slowly approached the window. His steps were unnaturally smooth, as if he was gliding along the ledge. I was on the 5th floor, and the ledge was too narrow for someone to simply walk on. But that didn't stop him. My heart was pounding furiously. I frantically tried to find logical explanations for what was happening. Maybe he was just some random person, like a climber or a window cleaner. But deep down, I already knew that wasn't the case. When he got close enough for the street light to illuminate his face, I felt the coldness envelop my entire body. This person's face was distorted, as if someone had tried to sculpt it out of wax, but their hands had trembled. His features were unnaturally blurred and twisted. The eyes, where the pupils should have been, were inky black voids. I recoiled, nearly falling to the floor, and almost knocked over a chair standing nearby. The stranger, as if hearing my reaction, froze in place and tilted his head to the side, as if studying me. I quickly crawled back, feeling the cold wall against my back, unable to tear my gaze away from the window. He suddenly raised his hand and touched the glass. The sound, a dry, scraping touch of fingers, made me squeeze my eyes shut and cover my ears. I couldn't bear the horror, but even with my eyes closed and the noise in my ears, I could feel his presence. He was standing there outside the window, waiting for me to open my eyes and meet his gaze again. A few minutes passed. Silence enveloped the room, and the fear gradually gave way to curiosity. I dared to open my eyes. The window was empty. I carefully got to my feet, still not believing my eyes. He was gone, as if he had evaporated. But just as I took a step toward the bed, I noticed that the window glass was covered with the marks of his fingers. They trailed from top to bottom, as if he had intentionally left a sign of his presence. That night, I didn't sleep. I closed all the windows and turned on the lights in every room. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, listening to the silence, trying to convince myself that it was just a dream, that the person didn't exist. But every night since then, when I approach the window, I can't shake the feeling that he's still somewhere nearby. Sometimes I even think I hear that familiar scratching sound again, but I try not to listen. I don't want to see him ever again.
This was our annual trip to the mountains. My friends and I loved outdoor activities, and every summer we would go on camping trips, spending the night in the forest. This time, we chose a place far from civilization to experience true wilderness. We set up camp in a dense forest near a small lake, so remote that even fishermen didn't come here. The place was picturesque, quiet, but from the first moment, we felt something strange in the air. The forest was too quiet. Even the birds weren't singing, and a light breeze seemed to whisper something we couldn't understand. We set up our tents, started a fire, and everything went as usual. By evening, we were sitting around the fire, chatting and laughing when one of our friends, Max, suddenly fell silent and raised his hand, calling for silence. "Do you hear that?" he asked, staring into the darkness between the trees. We listened, but heard nothing. Only the faint rustle of leaves. But Max kept looking towards the forest, his face growing paler. "There's someone there," he said with such certainty that we all got goosebumps. At that moment, I also heard something strange. It was a faint whisper coming from somewhere deep in the forest. At first, it was barely discernible, but as we listened, it grew louder and more distinct. But the creepiest part was that the words being whispered were incomprehensible, as if in a foreign language. The whisper enveloped us from all sides. It seemed to come from the ground itself. We exchanged glances, not knowing what to do. The campfire, usually so cozy and warm, now seemed like the only protective barrier between us and the darkness. At some point, Max, perhaps wanting to show his bravery, suggested we go and find out where the sound was coming from. "It could be someone who got lost," he suggested. We were foolish enough to agree. We grabbed our flashlights and headed into the depths of the forest. The whisper didn't stop. It seemed to be leading us, luring us further in. The trees around us grew taller and denser, the darkness closing in tighter. We had been walking for about 20 minutes when suddenly the whisper stopped. We halted. In the complete silence, I felt my heart pounding in my chest. No one dared say a word. And then, right in front of us, something flashed between the trees. It was a silhouette. A dark figure moving at an unnatural speed, so fast that I couldn't even make it out. We froze in place, afraid to take another step. The whisper resumed, this time closer. We thought it was coming from right behind us. We turned around simultaneously and saw a shadow moving directly towards us. No one screamed, no one ran. We just stood there, paralyzed by fear.
This happened a couple of years ago when I was driving home from work late at night. The road was long, and my thoughts were already muddled from exhaustion. A dark highway, no streetlights, no cars, and only emptiness around. I was driving on an old road that few people used, especially at that hour. It was around midnight, and everything was quiet. The only sound I could hear was the engine of my car and the tires rolling over the asphalt. I was on a familiar route, one I had taken many times before, but that night felt different from all the others. At some point, I noticed something flash by on the roadside ahead. I felt uneasy, but I decided to ignore it. Maybe it was just my imagination. A few minutes later, I noticed something strange again. In the beam of my headlights, a figure appeared. A woman stood on the side of the road, wearing a long white dress. She was still, and her silhouette seemed a bit blurry. I thought she needed help. Maybe her car broke down or something else happened. Nevertheless, something inside me tensed up. My heart started beating faster. As I got closer to get a better look at her, I noticed she was staring directly at me without moving. Her eyes were huge, and they seemed to glow in the dark, but what scared me the most was that her feet seemed to hover above the ground. She wasn't touching the earth, and it felt like a monstrous violation of all laws of reality. I pressed the gas pedal, trying to get past her as quickly as possible. Cold sweat ran down my back. I drove a few more kilometers, convincing myself that it was just my imagination. I was probably very tired, and my brain was playing tricks on me. But something made me glance in the rearview mirror. And then I felt the blood freeze in my veins. She was there again, standing by the roadside in the same spot where I had first seen her. I abruptly slowed down and looked back at the road. The road was empty. I could hardly believe my eyes. The woman had disappeared again. At that moment, I realized it wasn't just fatigue or hallucinations. Something strange, something supernatural was happening on that highway. When I finally got home, I couldn't sleep. Thoughts of that woman kept swirling in my head. I turned on all the lights in the house, trying to dispel the darkness, but the fear wouldn't leave. Even weeks later, the image didn't leave me. Sometimes at night, I felt like I saw her again, standing by the roadside outside my window. But when I opened my eyes, she wasn't there. But the feeling that she was somewhere nearby didn't leave me for a minute. A few months later, I told a friend about the incident, and his reaction was unexpected. He had also heard of ghost women who had been seen on that highway. It's an old legend passed down from generation to generation. They say that decades ago, a young woman died on that road while trying to catch a ride. Since then, she appears on that stretch of road, making drivers feel as helpless and doomed as she once did.